Chicago scene has always been, from an industrial perspective, sort of unique because there were so many talented artists that sprang from Chicago, and even the music itself had sort of its own particular style. Like the whole cold wave thing and guitar-oriented industrial was always much bigger in Chicago than it was, for example, in New York City or Tampa or LA. So it's always sort of been sort of its own little capsule of a scene, and we still see that. There's still a lot of bands in Chicago that are out working and, you know, still playing their shows and still doing their thing after 10, 15 years, you know, Acumen Nation being one, and, you know, it's just, it's really a quite a different type of atmosphere here than what you would expect to see, you know, for example, in New York.
I remember when we played here last December, and Noir took us out to Neo, and I remember they had their own way of dancing, but I was a little too drunk to remember exactly what the difference was, but it was definitely their own unique, style.
There was some pretty, I remember that now that you bring it up, there was some real dramatics on the dance floor when we were here in December, but, you know, that's great. People get into it and they enjoy themselves, and that's really what it's about.
When weapons of mass destruction thing turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up in it. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive, illegal, domestic surveillance on its own citizens. You and me.
It's just ironic sometimes with bands like us and with such a violent tone to our message, though we're not necessarily violent people unless we need to be.
Yeah.
It sort of definitely has a violent tone to the music, and you know, to see people.
Dancers in New York at our show, it's more of a beat down industrial kind of thing, whereas other cities are a little more reserved compared to the kind of music that we play.
Yeah, it gets kind of violent, like a typical, you know, FGFC820 show. Somebody's bleeding, and, you know, something gets broken, and cops show up at some point, and we've shut down our fair share of clubs across the country where, like, our show ended up being the last show that they had at the venue. But it's really not our fault. It's just kind of, I guess, the crowd that we draw. But it's interesting to see some of the people coming, the way they interpret, you know, our music into some sort of dance form. It's just kind of interesting. There's still a couple of really good parties there that are run by people that are legitimately concerned with music as an art form. It's not, for them, it's not something that's, you know, an identity that, you know, is a passing phase for them, or it's not something that they got into through a magazine ad or a Hot Topic or something like that. So, I mean, these are people that that really know their shit. So the music that they play on these nights, even though they don't draw the kind of numbers that they used to, is primarily new music, which is really important for the scene. If we don't get, you know, an infusion of new music and you hear the same bands and the same tracks every time you go out, that gets to be a little tedious. It accounts for a lot of the drop-off in the club scene in New York, as people just got tired of hearing the same stuff and paying $20 to do it.
There's a lot of law has to do with the laws though too and everything. New York keeps cracking down on the clubs. The whole noise ordinance they have and everything, and they keep just shutting people down and everything. Like, I was DJing for 5 years up in Spanish Harlem, and it wasn't the most friendly party just for the random club goer kind of thing. It was a little more hardcore than your regular party, but the cops just finally shut it down because it was getting too out of hand and everything.
And we're finding that more and more the parties are, you know, they look pretty much the same, you know, from city to city, whereas it used to be, you know, there were a couple of cities that had really big scenes and then a couple of cities that had smaller scenes. The scenes all seem to be a lot smaller in all of the cities now, so it's one of the things we're trying to contend with.